Hi everybody, it's Miss Cole again. Previously, I've talked about coordinating conjunctions, commonly known by the acronym fanboys. You can find a link to that video down in the description. Today, I want to introduce one of their counterparts, the subordinate conjunctions. Like the fanboys, these are conjunctions, so they're words that link ideas together. However, unlike coordinating conjunctions, they're not used in lists. They are only used to connect clauses and to show the relationship between them. When you have sentences that consist of clauses joined by coordinating conjunctions, those are compound sentences. Sentences that are joined by subordinate conjunctions are called complex sentences. In both cases, it's important to pay attention to the organization and the punctuation so that you can avoid run-ons or fragments. In both cases, you start out with an independent clause. Remember, this is a clause that could be a simple sentence on its own, like this one. Emily would be competing in the championship bout. In this simple sentence, we have a single subject, Emily, and an action verb phrase, would be competing. The verbs would and be are helping verbs, and competing is the main verb, and since it's an action verb, the whole phrase together functions as an action. And then for a little bit more description, we have in the championship bout as a prepositional phrase, with in as the preposition and bout as the object of the preposition. I've explained all of those concepts in other videos, so if any of that was confusing, you can go back, make a note of which part was confusing, and then go review that video, okay? One of the most common subordinate conjunctions is the word because. In fact, you may have had teachers tell you that you shouldn't start a sentence with because. This is because starting a clause with the subordinate conjunction makes it a dependent clause rather than an independent clause. In standard English, it can't stand alone as a sentence. You can kind of hear it, actually. Listen to what happens when we put it at the beginning of the example I gave previously. Because Emily would be competing in the championship bout, you notice those three dots, that ellipsis? An ellipsis is used to show that something has been left out. And for me, at least, I can hear it in that clause. Because Emily would be competing in the championship bout, something happened, or something was going to happen, or, something. It's not a complete sentence, and you can totally tell. I hope, anyhow. Otherwise, unfortunately, it's going to make this a lot harder. Sorry. So we need to complete that thought. Take a look at this complex sentence. Because Emily would be competing in the championship bout, she worked diligently with her trainer. In order to make it a complete sentence, I have to add another independent clause that completes the thought. It can't be just any random clause like, it was a warm summer day. Well, maybe it was, but that independent clause doesn't fit. The subordinate conjunction because means that there has to be a cause and effect relationship between the two clauses. That's why she worked diligently with her trainer makes more sense. Emily's participation in the titled bout is the cause that leads to the effect of her working diligently. Let's go back to that dependent clause as a fragment. Because Emily would be competing in the championship bout. So we don't want a period there because that would make it a fragment. We need to add an independent clause that finishes the thought to complete the sentence. Because Emily would be competing in the championship bout, she worked diligently with her trainer. Now, when we add the independent clause after the dependent clause, look at what happens with the punctuation. That period needs to change to a comma. We don't want a period because the sentence is continuing, but we do need punctuation there to mark the break between the clauses. This is important because complex sentences can have their clauses in either order. Let's see what happens with this example. She worked diligently with her trainer because Emily would be competing in the championship bout. In this case, we do need to make an additional change, but that's because of pronouns and antecedents. I've talked about pronouns in a different video, but in general, you want to have the noun before the pronoun so that you know what the pronoun refers to when you get to it. So let's switch just those. Emily worked diligently with her trainer because she would be competing in the championship bout. That sounds smoother to me. I hope you can hear the difference as well. So something I want to point out about this is that there's no punctuation between the clauses. This is because the subordinate conjunction marks the beginning of the dependent clause. So the comma would be extra and it's not needed. The rule for this is that if you begin a complex sentence with a dependent clause, you need a comma right before the independent clause. Let's look at some other examples. Maverick ran laps when he was late for practice. The subordinate conjunction is when, which marks the beginning of the next clause. When we put the clauses in the other order, it looks like this. When Maverick was late for practice, he ran laps. In this complex sentence, the dependent clause is first, so the comma marks the beginning of the independent clause, he ran laps. If you want to be successful, you must work hard. In this case, I've used the second person pronoun you, so the order of the pronoun antecedent doesn't have to be rearranged. Again, notice that the subordinate conjunction if starts the sentence, so there's a comma after the dependent clause to mark the break between the clauses. When we reverse the clauses, it looks like this. You must work hard if you want to be successful. Here, the complex sentence begins with the independent clause, so the subordinate conjunction if marks the beginning of the dependent clause. You can get practice using subordinate conjunctions effectively on the website No Red Ink, which is linked down in the description. This site uses the acronym Swabbies to refer to subordinate conjunction. Swabbies stands for the words since, when, after, because, and if, which are some of the most common subordinate conjunctions. However, they are not the only subordinate conjunctions. First of all, there are a lot. This is a poster I have up on my wall, and even it is not complete. What makes this even more challenging is that many of these words and phrases can be used in other ways besides being subordinate conjunctions, often as adverbs, which will be covered in a different video. So for this particular grammatical structure, it's really important to pay attention to how it's used. All right, to review. Clauses that begin with a subordinate conjunction cannot stand alone as sentences in standard English. When a complex sentence begins with a subordinate clause, it must have a comma before the independent clause to mark the break between them. When a complex sentence begins with an independent clause, it does not need a comma before the subordinate clause because the subordinate conjunction marks the beginning of that clause. I've listed some links that I found helpful down in the description. If there's anything about all of this that is still unclear or anything I've missed that I should have included, please let me know in the comments. And if you're feeling confident, leave an example of a complex sentence. Actually, that was a complex sentence. See how useful they are? Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye for now.